Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Scoberg here with Consolidated Planning Group, and we are here today with Nehtra Davis-Moore, and we are talking about the ever important, confusing topic of supplemental security income and Medicaid and what happens when you work. We've got a lot of slides today that we're going to get through. We've got a lot of write-in questions, so if you sent your question in already, we do have that. We're going to get to as many questions as possible during the time that we have together today. This meeting is being recorded. Everyone who is registered for today's meeting is going to get a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording in your email following this meeting today. We invite you to put your questions in the chat box, and again, we're going to get to as many as possible. A lot of the slides are going to answer a lot of the questions, so our intent is to just get through the slides during the time that we have together. If you're planning your lunch or whatever, we're going for an hour from 12 to 1. And so I just also want to mention from a housekeeping perspective, we are in webinar mode today, and what that means is that we cannot see you or hear you, but we know you're there and we are glad that you're here today. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You're in the right place. We can definitely help you. These webinars are designed to empower parents and to give them the tools and resources that they need to be successful when it comes to planning for their loved one with a disability. I am a parent to kids with disabilities, to adult kids with disabilities, and the journey is long and it is tough and it is confusing. So if you felt any of those things, you're definitely not alone. You're in the right place. The Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel, there are over 500 webinars on planning for special needs, so you'll want to check that out. All of them are free. You can subscribe to that YouTube channel for free. And topics, everything that you can imagine, from special needs trust, guardianship, Medicaid waivers. The topics are endless. Like I said, there's over 500 out there, so you'll be able to find a topic probably for the step that you're on in your journey. Consolidated Planning Group, we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors and members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We help families just like yours set up protection plans, lifetime care plans. We do a lot of transition planning. We set up ABLE accounts, and we do a lot of advocacy. People come to us because they want to plan for the future of their loved one. They want to know answers like, how much money do I need to fund a special needs trust for the future care of my loved one? What comes next after high school, transition programs, residential living options, things of that nature. So we go deep and wide with families, and all of our plans are specifically tailored and specialized to your planning needs, taking into consideration the planning that you've done so far. Some families have done a lot of planning and they need a second opinion or a look under the hood by a professional that is specifically nuanced with special needs. Other people are just getting started, or they need to pick up where they left off. And I just always like to mention here how important it is not to beat yourself up about where you are in this journey. You're here today, and it's about moving yourself forward, not about looking back and beating yourself up of what you didn't get done. Our life is busy. It's complicated and it is busy. So things do get put on the shelf, but it's just about picking it back up and getting moving from where you are right now. We think about things like developing a future care plan on who's going to care for your child when you're gone. We're of sound mind and body right now, but we may not always be. We may not always be able to provide the caregiving services that we once did. And so thinking about that now, while we are healthy or while we are of sound mind and body, is going to help prevent some of the confusion in the future. When it comes to transition planning, considering post-high school educational or vocational options, or maybe they're going to work with the Workforce Commission and VR and go to work. There's so many options out there, but it's important to be looking at those and having a plan. And I know there's a lot of transition consultants at the schools that work with you on these items as well, but we can't recommend that enough. We also can suggest consider touring transition programs, partial care, full care, residential communities. Some of these waiting lists can be long, so you may have a plan that you're going to enter a private pay transition program post high school, and then you find out that there's a waiting list that's several years long. So we do encourage people to start looking at that. I can tell you from my own experience as a parent, you start that freshman year of high school and you think, gosh, I have all this time. And then the time flies and you blink and they're already 18, maybe they're 20, 21, 22. And we have people that are on here that are much older. They have loved ones that are much older. So just consider all of these things. And we always just like to reiterate that we want people to make careful considerations before naming siblings as future caregivers. We often see siblings as future trustees of the special needs trust that's going to provide care for the individual with a disability. But I always just like to remind folks, and I have multiple kids, just like we had hopes and dreams when we were 18, 20, 22, 25, maybe we're going to go to college, maybe we're going to have a great career, maybe we're going to have a house, maybe we're going to get married, maybe we're going to have a family of our own. Our other children have those hopes and dreams as well. And sometimes our other children, as much as they love their sibling and they would say yes if you ask them, it's not always a job that they're ready for, that they can take on, or maybe that their spouses would be ready for. So we always like people to keep that in mind as well. Well, Nehtra, it is a pleasure to be back with you. And you always have lots of great information. And I know that you are a subject matter expert on this. I've talked to you in the past on these things, and so we are excited to have you here with us today. So I'm going to let you take that away.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. Or actually, right afternoon, just crossed over. I am happy to be here, and thank you so much for having me again. Welcome, everyone. You are in the right place if you are ready to get some information solely related to what we're going to focus on today is SSI. SSI, and with that being said, SSI and Medicaid go hand in hand. So we will touch a little bit on that. But please, you can ask questions as we go along. I did receive some of your questions, and I do think that some will be answered. But if they are not, just please feel free to use that chat, and I will address questions the best I can. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get started with some things that we hear in relation to receiving disability-based benefit in the Social Security world. One of them is that if I go to work, I will lose my benefits. Hear that all the time, right? I can only make a certain number of hours or make a certain amount of money or work a certain number of hours each month, or I'll lose my benefits. And I must keep $1 of SSI, or I'm going to lose my Medicaid. If I go back to work and then stop working, I won't be able to get my cash benefits or my insurances back. I can't have a career and keep SSI and Medicaid. So all of these, right? We hear these things often, and a lot of us are kind of stuck on these things, on what we hear. Because it's like, okay, if everybody's saying this, it's got to be, these things have got to be true. Actually, all of these things are myths, and that is what we are going to focus on this hour, where we're kind of busting out these myths and why they're myths. Let's talk about the two disability programs within the Social Security Administration. Again, the one that we're going to focus on today is SSI, Title 16. And within SSI, there's different categories. The first one is childhood SSI, and that is for children who are between the ages of 0 to 18. And adult SSI is for those who are between the ages of 18 and 64. And now the third one, SSI Aged, is for those who are 65 and older. And that last category of SSI is not a disability-related benefit. We will, I'm sure I'll be back at a later date to discuss the other title programs, which falls under Title II. But again, today we're going to focus solely on SSI. Typically, when we're trying to gain information to understand the disability programs, it's better to do them separately and in batches. So that's what you'll be seeing today. So the best you can focus on and remember that this information that we're covering today is centered around Title 16 SSI rules. So let's talk about SSI in relation to why one would receive SSI. So it's not technically just based on you have a disability that meets the Social Security's definition of having a disability. A lot of times people think it's connected to, for example, on this slide, you'll see, well, I can't work and earn a living wage, right? And a lot of people get stuck saying that SSI, I can only make a certain amount. And typically when we hear that as benefits counselors, we'll see that people get stuck on, well, no, Social Security said I couldn't earn more than 1,620. And when we start hearing some of those numbers, as benefits counselors, we relate those numbers to certain rules and processes within the disability program rules. SGA is one of those, substantial gainful activity. Substantial gainful activity is a set amount that changes annually, okay? But this is a set amount that Social Security has this year for 2025. For those who are statutorily blind, it's 2,700, and for those who are not statutorily blind, the SGA level is 1,620. Now, all that worrying about SGA, and a lot of times people are on SSI, they get stuck just thinking about SGA. And I am here to tell you that SGA is not a factor after someone is approved to start receiving SSI. So they look at the SGA factor when someone's trying to get on to SSI. Once somebody is approved for receiving SSI, SGA is no longer a factor. The program rules on the SSI side work differently. It's actually a calculation that's done, and we'll talk about what that calculation looks like later in the presentation. You can move forward. So let's talk about the differences between childhood SSI and adult SSI. So when we're talking about childhood SSI, what Social Security is looking at is how a child's disability impacts them in their school and home setting. Okay, and then adult SSI is looking at how one's disability impacts them in an employment setting, environment, and does that disability impact someone to where they have difficulties obtaining substantial gainful employment. So it's looking at childhood SSI, you know, in the home and school setting. And then when we move over and transition into the adult SSI world, it's looking at how one's disability can impact them in an employment work-based environment. Let's talk about deeming. And this is actually touching on one of the questions that came up. Deeming is definitely a thing in the SSI world. And there's three relationships where deeming applies. So the general idea of deeming, the easiest way to think of it is this is income of someone that has a legal obligation to help support whoever they're supporting in these relationships, right? So for example, the first and obvious relationship would be parent to a minor child. And when we say minor child, that is anyone under the age of 18. And then we have spouse to spouse, and then we have sponsor to immigrant. So those are the three relationships where Social Security will recognize a legal obligation for support, and deeming in the terms of receiving SSI can be an issue. Next slide, please. So childhood SSI into adult SSI. And this is a very important age to remember. Oftentimes, I see and get reached out to or contacted a lot of times for children who have turned 18 and they have a huge overpayment. And that overpayment typically started because of during childhood SSI, when they're receiving childhood SSI. Oftentimes, when I see that, it's due to that deemed income that wasn't being reported to Social Security properly. Now, the magical number when someone becomes an adult in Social Security's world is 18. 18 is when someone is considered an adult on their own, and the aspect of deeming no longer applies. Now, with that being said, you might be, well, but for some reason, my child who has turned 18, Social Security is still reducing their SSI. Why? So oftentimes, if you have, your adult child that's living with you, and you can't determine, well, why, well, if deeming is no longer an issue, then why is their SSI being reduced? In-kind support and maintenance is definitely something that you can see on your adult child's record when they transition over to 18. And in-kind support and maintenance automatically reduces the SSI by a third. So essentially, the most that you can receive in SSI this year, 2025, is $967. If one has in-kind support and maintenance on their record, it's going to be, their award amount is going to be reduced automatically by a third. And so that would drop to the $644.67 this year. Now, oftentimes I get the question, well, is it like gonna stay forever? This isn't have to be on the record. How do we correct this? I think it's on this, if you want to click it again, I think there's one more bullet on this. It can be avoided if one is paying their fair share. And a lot of times I get the question, well, what does that mean when somebody's paying their fair share? Typically, Social Security is going to believe what you're saying, depending on the living situation. Let's say, for example, if one is living, I don't know, let's say in a $60 million house, right? We're just using an extravagant scenario. Obviously, there's going to be some questions. Well, why is one living in a $60 million house and on SSI, right? Social Security is going to question something like that. But for, general folks who are, taking care of themselves, they're living with a parent, what you really need to do is set up a basic rental agreement, okay? And basic rental agreement showing that your adult child is indeed helping take care of themselves, right? And trying to keep going towards, being able to gainfully take care of themselves in a way where they don't have to continue to depending on you as parents. Now, a lot of times people ask me, well, what does the basic rental agreement look like? I have seen basic rental agreements where you'll be surprised. It's on a legal notepad and it says, my daughter and I agree that she is to pay, $300 to $400 a month for her share of living expenses, right? And what happens is both the daughter and parent sign off on that, and they can get a copy of that to Social Security, showing that we're both in agreement that my daughter is taking care of themselves, and it's as simple as that. I know that CPG can also help you guys create basic rental agreements, but overall, what you're trying to do is showing that that support is happening from the individual who's trying to self take care of themselves, and you get a copy of that over to Social Security so we can get that ISM off of their record and boost that SSI back up. So the award amount's not starting right at that 644, because when we start at 644, when you see the calculation and how it works, it's going to go down from there when we have other income involved, especially from employment. Allison,
So,
do you have something to say?
a couple of things. Yes, we do have a rental agreement template. There's a fair share, and then there's a rental agreement. There's two different things. So, a fair share is basically the number of people in the household divided by the monthly expenses, like the rent or the mortgage payment and the utilities. They used to count food. They stopped counting food basically in October of last year. So that's going to be a fair share which you'll just have to show bills, and it just depends on what your monthly bills on are, if they can pay their fair share. Another thing that changed at the end of last year is some people were submitting a rental agreement and saying that their child was paying $350 a month or $500 a month, and the Social Security Administration was coming back and saying, "Hey, they're not paying fair market value, and we're not going to accept this." That has gone away as well. So that 350 or that 500, if you submit it as a rental agreement, that will be accepted. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those things, and a couple of things that we have in the chat box. And I think it's important for mentioning, we are talking about SSI today, as Nehtra talked about. But a person in the chat box was talking about, basically the childhood disability benefits under a parent's record when a child has a disability prior to age 22, when that parent turns on their Social Security or Social Security disability, that disabled adult child is eligible for benefits under the parent's record. And I just wanted to mention that it is my recommendation, and sometimes, and there's probably people on here that this can't be helped, but it is my recommendation, if you can help it, to apply for SSI and Medicaid and get that approved first prior to turning on your retirement benefits. Now, if a person's already disabled, we can't help that. If a person has died, a parent has died, and there's survivor benefits involved, we can't help that. But the benefits of doing it in order and letting the child qualify for SSI and Medicaid first, then there's Medicaid protections in the future when they change over to that childhood disability benefits, which oftentimes are much greater than the SSI amount and would otherwise make them lose Medicaid. They'll be able to keep it. So there's a kind of an order of operations. And again, it can't always be helped, but I do like to mention that. And Nehtra, you can chime in on any of that or anything that you want to add or take away.
Yeah, so that first question about the disabled adult child, that is definitely a Title II based benefit. So when I come back and do the Title II series, we'll definitely talk about childhood disability beneficiaries, also known as disabled adult children. So kind of hold off on that one, because we can definitely get into a rabbit trail about Title II. And Title II program rules are literally night and day when we're talking in relation to SSI. So I don't want to muddy the waters in stepping in that. And yes, guardianship. So guardianship oftentimes and representative payee, those definitions can kind of get mixed up. And guardianship and rep payee status, yes, you can still, have a rental agreement set up, even though you have guardianship, because the point is you're showing that one is indeed supporting themselves. Okay. Rental agreement info, tax forms. I am not a tax expert, so I
We had a
cannot.
CPA last week, and she basically said in general, and this is going to be Teresa Ferruzzo CPA, it's on our YouTube channel. She basically said that she, as a CPA, she does not take the rental income off of taxes. She does not report that. And what I would say is all of our years that people have said, some say if you charge rent, yes, you put it on your taxes. If you charge fair share, you don't. And if you talk to 5 different CPAs, they'll tell you different things. But that came out last week. And then one person said, and it's not an appeal form. You can fax in your rental agreement. You can take it in. You need an appointment. The host mentioned that SGA is not applicable once they're on SSI. According to another lecture, SGA is still a factor even on SSI. SGA is only a factor for SSI while you're going through the approval process. And where you might be confused is SGA is looked at for the life of the claim for SSDI. Okay, so that's a difference. It is confusing. But as she was saying, we're talking about SSI today. We're not going deep and wide into SSDI, but SGA is looked at the entire life of the claim for SSDI, not SSI. So can we no longer use SSI to pay for some of the groceries? SSI is designed for food and shelter. They basically are saying that in-kind support and maintenance, basically when they say they got rid of food and counting food, it turns out they decided people should eat and they shouldn't
Wow.
count that against them, turns out. So it was really a great thing that that went away in October. But yes, food and shelter. And I like to tell people, there is a guide that you can download. It's a PDF and it's called A Guide for Representative Payees. And it's a boring read, but it is an excellent read to tell you about what you can use the SSI money for, what are appropriate expenses or inappropriate expenses. So I would suggest that you check that out. And so one person says, how do I find out if my child is on SSI under Title II, under Title 16 or Title II, Childhood Disability Benefits or SSDI?
So a great place to start to know exactly what your child is receiving. The document that we absolutely love. Yes, you have your award letters, and if you don't understand award letters, we can go through that award letter and tell you. But the other great document that, and the only place we can get it is from the Social Security office, is a benefit planning query known as the BPQY. And that BPQY is going to tell you exactly what is on one's Social Security record. So we love benefit planning queries. You can get it at your local office. I would not recommend calling the 1-800 number to request them. It's really a good idea to go and request in person or contact the local office and request that it be mailed to you. And that is really the best way you can tell. The other way you can tell, if you have a myssa.gov account that's set up, if you're a rep payee, you do have to set up a rep payee in the rep payee portal, and you can find out some details there. But typically, right, us as benefits counselors, the most that one can receive in SSI this year is $967 in award amount. So typically, as benefits counselors, if we see that there is a benefit award amount that is above that, that tells us it's not likely SSI. Okay. It gets a little confusing when we see values under 967 because, something could be going on. Sometimes people can be receiving some SSI and some Title II. Those are concurrent. But really and truly, if it's above 967, there most likely is maybe some survivor benefits going around, maybe retirement, or one of the Title II programs, SSDI, or CDB DAX, or a disabled widower. Okay.
One thing that I want to bring up, and we've got the chat box is pretty active and we're going to keep moving, but child support, somebody put down, help me understand how child support factors into the SSI amount, given the disabled adult child will continue to receive child support throughout her life. If the child support amount is paid to a trust, does this help ensure the full SSI benefits could be received?
So child support itself is considered income. So it will be deemed, especially for those who are under 18, it'll be deemed against the SSI because essentially you still have to look at it as the obligation to help support that child. And if it's coming from the other parent, that income is for that child, right? So that is seen as income that is deemed against the child. Now, as far as child support being paid into a trust, that might definitely be an attorney general question because I
can chime in there. We partner with attorneys all the time. So in order for the child support to not be counted against the individual for SSI purposes, it has to be redirected to a first party special needs trust. You can't just do it yourself. You have to get a first party special needs trust to begin with an attorney, but then there needs to be a court order redirecting that child support to the first party special needs trust. And so we do have attorneys. Again, on our YouTube channel, we have lots of conversations about this matter. But in fact, the unfortunate thing with this, so if you're going through divorce, negotiating this on the front end and getting this set up properly on the front end will be cheaper for you than going back to the well later. Because if you have to go back to the well later to get this corrected, you need two attorneys. You need an estate planning attorney, nuanced and special needs, to set up the first party special needs trust. And then you're going to need a divorce attorney or a child support attorney. And neither one of those attorneys do the other attorney's job. So unfortunately, in that example, you'll need two. But if you get it set up on the front end in your documents, stating that child support will be directed to a first party special needs trust, and get that first party special needs trust, it'll be a lot easier and cheaper on the back end. So it is important to know that even though the child support is paid to the parent, because some people think they're going to get around this because it's paid to me, not the kid, it's still for the benefit of the kid, and it's counted against the kid. So there really is no way around this other than you're not court ordered to get child support. I've seen them actually count the child support against the child, and they're not even receiving the money. Like the other parent maybe not even be paying what is court ordered, but use it against them. So there's either a court order or there's not a court order, and it is either going to a first party special needs trust or it's not. But if it's not, then it is going to be counted against them. So it's important to know that. And I suggest, if you find yourself in that situation, getting that cleaned up before you apply is probably a lot better and a lot less confusing.
And if you are in the situation and already receiving SSI, just it's very important to report that income every month by the 6th of every month. A lot of times we see that's where some overpayment issues will start happening, when there's support payments coming in from an absent parent.
I'm so glad that you said that. I didn't even think about that, but that's so true. And you could end up owing them 30, 40, $50,000. It's like it was just this oversight. They're understaffed and they're very, very busy, and
Yeah.
they just didn't catch it all these years, and you didn't know. It wasn't like you were trying to defraud the Social Security Administration. You didn't know it needed to be reported or what have you. And then you find yourself in this huge overpayment situation, and those are a very, very big deal for a lot of families.
Yes. And so speaking of, we're talking about, well, how do I leave my child anything, right? ABLE accounts are one of the most amazing things ever. And the easiest way that I describe ABLE accounts, and it's gonna sound funny when I say this, but it's a legal way to launder money. And that is how I kind of just remember ABLE accounts myself, so I can understand just the concept of ABLE accounts. But really and truly, you as a parent can open up an ABLE account for your child, and you can put money in there. And I think the most this year is up to 19,000 this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I think it's
It's
19,000 this year.
19,000. It's whatever the gift tax exclusion is. So it is
I think it's
19,000 for
19,000 for this year.
2025. And if the individual is working, you can put up to their earnings amount an additional 15,560. So it's
Yeah.
up to what they've earned. So if they only earn 5,000, you could put an additional 5,000 in.
But
So there is
but
an
you can use
additional.
that. But you could use that. And so, for example, let's say you're putting money in there for that rent every month, and then wait, but wait, I put the money in there as a parent. You could put that money in there as a parent. ABLE accounts are absolutely wonderful, and I typically recommend them to any parent that has a child with a disability, especially if you are planning kind of that long-term planning that Allison was touching on earlier, kind of that broad lifetime plan for the moment that it happens where you're not here. ABLE accounts are a great solution and a great way to build up for your child who will be an adult one day.
Nitra, a couple of things that I want to mention. An
Yep.
ABLE account and a third-party special needs trust work beautifully together. An ABLE account can pay for shelter without a one-third reduction to
Hmm.
SSI, whereas if you pay for shelter out of a special needs trust, there would be a one-third reduction to SSI. And guys, I'm talking about SSI, not SSDI, okay?
Right.
So that is one reason why you might have an ABLE account and a special needs trust. An ABLE account, there is a limited amount of money that you can put into an ABLE account, whereas there is an unlimited amount of money that can go into a special needs trust. So that's another thing. And then the last thing that I want to, there's two more things. One is that you can't leave life insurance proceeds to an ABLE account. You can leave an inheritance or a lump sum or a retirement account to a special needs trust, but there's no such thing as making a beneficiary an ABLE account. Okay, so that's another reason why you might need both accounts. And one person said, not all ABLE accounts have a Medicaid payback. And I want to clarify that. And it's possible that we have people from all across the United States
Right.
on here today. We are domiciled in Texas, but we do work all across the United States. And it is true that some states do not have a Medicaid payback on the ABLE account. Texas, however, does. It is also true that you can get any state's ABLE account, but I want you to know that even if you go to a state that doesn't have a Medicaid payback, if you are a resident of Texas, the Medicaid payback still applies to you. So there is no, my point is there's really no getting around the Medicaid payback when you're a resident of a state that has the Medicaid payback. It's just how that works. So I wanted to mention that because that's a question that has come up a lot of times. There is some proposed change in legislation to not have a Medicaid payback on the ABLE accounts or the first party special needs trust, but it hasn't passed. And so hopefully we're hopeful that it will, but it hasn't passed yet. So
And it is important to do your research because you can get it, open an able account in any state. Um, there's an able account website, like the national website, where there's a comparison tool where you can compare different able accounts that might work best for your child's situation. So, just because you're in Texas doesn't mean you have to open an able account in Texas. But I definitely recommend that comparison tool of the different able accounts because it just it helps when you can make an informed decision.
I wanted to mention one more thing. We had a long question about a person who said that their child was getting SSDI and then it went away when she went back to work at his teen. So I just want to clarify, your child was not getting SSDI if he was 15 years old. He was getting SSI, and when you went back to work, it changed things. She was kind of talking about losing Medicaid and other benefits, but your child was under Title 16, and that is SSI. It is confusing. They have all these acronyms and they sound the same. Some are the same, some are not. But in this example, this is the supplemental security income, and it's based off being indigent and being disabled. And if the child is under age 18, it's based off of mom's income and asset, or whoever the parents are, income and assets, not the child. So although your child may not be getting benefits anymore, when the child turns 18, you're going to want to reapply and get that kind of get that back on board. Someone says, what is a Medicaid clawback? So Medicaid payback, Medicaid clawback. It's basically a calculation, and you can Google this. It's a calculation, and it is convoluted and it is confusing. But basically, if your child has received Medicaid, if they have an ABLE account or a first party special needs trust, not third party, there is a such wording as a Medicaid payback where they'll do a calculation of what has Medicaid paid out on behalf of said child, what is left in the first party special needs trust, what is left in the ABLE account, and then they will pay themselves back, and whatever is left would go to the estate of the child. And some states have a Medicaid payback and some states don't, but Texas does in fact have that. So another person says ABLE account has 100,000 limit. How can we keep contributing to it and Social Security won't consider it as income and reduce the pension benefits? would a second one have to be set up? You can only have one ABLE account for the individual with a disability. So you can't set up another one. This is where we would have a special needs trust for the kid, and you can have an unlimited amount of money. And that individual is correct. There is a limit of $100,000 for an ABLE account before they would disqualify for SSI. So if there was more than $100,000 in an ABLE account, they will disqualify for SSI. So if you Google how much can I have in an ABLE account, I think it's $550,000, but that isn't true if you want to stay eligible for SSI. Okay, so that's going to be an important factor, and we're going to keep moving for now, Nitra. Okay.
Yeah, let's touch on the income and resource limit, because resource limits and SSI are very important to remember. I often call that resource limit. This is where we see deal breakers. Okay. Oftentimes you'll see, well, what happened to my child's Medicaid? They were on SSI, and usually the first question that I asked was their account at any point in time ever over $2,000? And I'll say, just go back and look, maybe, give yourself maybe a 3 to 6 month time frame, and look back and see if that account just ever at one point just was over $2,000. And sure enough, parents will find that $2,000 resource limit for individuals who are receiving SSI is very crucial to stay over every month. The other resource limit is for couples. That $3,000 is for couples who are both receiving SSI. But $2,000 for an individual who is receiving SSI, it is very, very, very important to maintain that $2,000 resource limit monthly. Now, oftentimes people say, well, what happens if I go over? Don't panic. You go over, and what happens is, they send, kind of like a stop sign to halt the Medicaid. And what you'll need to do is just make sure the account, gets paid down. But if you do see that you might potentially be getting into a situation where you're going to be routinely over that resource limit, that is when we really want to start doing some planning and looking at our trust and ABLE account options. But if it's kind of like a once, every few months kind of thing, then you're probably okay and just need to keep better track of it. But this is again why I love the cushion of having the ABLE account or trust options, just to kind of avoid having those resource issues. And that is another way to be proactive and responsible in just managing SSI overall. And as well, just for that long haul, especially when we're talking about entering the world of employment, because the resource issue is going to eventually come up. So I'm always like, hey, let's proactively plan ahead to help try to avoid that. And then that in turn also helps you proactively be prepared for any overpayment issues that might come from being over resourced.
So I just want to take a moment for the families that are on here and they have a loved one that has more than $2,000 in their name. They have not applied yet, but they're thinking about it. They're going to be soon. How do we get this lower than 2,000? So what you don't do, I like to talk about legitimate ways to do it and wrong ways to go about doing it. A wrong way to go about doing it is I'll just close the account. Okay, so there's going to be a look back on that. They're going to look at that. Okay, so we can spend down the money for the benefit of said child and show what we bought it for, what we paid for, what we got for them, and spend down that money. That money can be legitimately moved to an ABLE account, or if it was in their name, their money, it could be legitimately moved to a first party special needs trust, and then it would not be counted. But I just wanted to talk about those ways because a lot of people have the idea of I'm just going to take his name off the account. I'm just going to close the account, and that can get you in trouble with that. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, thank you. We can move forward. Let's talk about the purpose and eligibility. There is a sequential evaluation that age 18 over 18 applications go through for SSI, and you've got to go through those 5 steps. I always say that the sequential evaluation is the even playing field on how Social Security determines when one is eligible to receive SSI. And then, of course, we just touched on that resource limit. But SSI overall is literally a small amount, right? A small amount. The most you can get in SSI this year is $967. That is a very small amount, right, to help obtain food and shelter. It's not designed to pay for your life expenses. It is designed for those two things, food and shelter. And I always say it's not, like steak dinner food. We're talking about, bare bones. This is a needs-based program. Needs-based program. So SSI purpose is needs-based and small amount of cash assistance for food and shelter with that resource limit. Next slide, please. Okay, we touched on this a little bit earlier, and I mentioned, reporting, especially if you're, a parent who has a child that's under 18. If you have a child that's under 18 and they're receiving SSI, your income is deemed against that SSI, and you have to report your income monthly to Social Security. Especially, and this is both parents, right? Especially if there's an absent parent, like I said, like we said earlier, if there's child support going on, if there's VA benefits that a child is receiving. I've seen that as well. Any income that a child is receiving or has access to under 18, parents, please, please, please report that income. Okay, you can keep going forward. Let's see. Reporting is such a big deal. So I really want to highlight for those parents that are on who have a child that's under 18 and they're on SSI, you got to report that income. Just a quick story I can tell you, I'm working on an overpayment situation for a child who is 15 and has a $30,000 overpayment right now because of deemed income that wasn't reported. So please, please, if you take anything away from today, please report any income. Please report any income that your child has access to if they're receiving SSI. It's very important because once they turn 18, you don't want your child who's just turning 18 to have that hefty dollar amount payment, overpayment to deal with. Allison, were you going to say
A couple
something?
of things. Somebody says, what if an ABLE account has third-party funds? You wouldn't put third-party funds
Right.
into an ABLE account generally because there's no Medicaid payback on the third-party trust, and there is a Medicaid payback on the ABLE account if you're living in a state that has Medicaid payback. So generally, we don't see that movement. I mean, I guess you could make that because you can look at an ABLE account as a savings to spend account because we can pay for shelter out of that. So sometimes, people might move money out of a special needs trust to a first party special needs trust to an ABLE account because they both have a Medicaid payback anyway. But most of the time, when the money, a lot of funding of the third party special needs trust comes at the death of the parents or the grandparents, is where the third party special needs trust funding comes in. So at that point, they're no longer on SSI, they're on SSDI or childhood disability benefits under a parent's record, and those rules are different, which we're going to get to, not today, but in another meeting. I want you to clarify one more thing, Nehtra. You were
Yeah.
talking in the previous slides about the resource limit of $2,000 and $3,000 for a family. And I just want
For
to
a couple.
reiterate, I know you said this, but under age 18, it's based off of the parent's income and assets, not the child's. Over age 18, it's based off the child's assets. So in the example, you have a minor child under age 18. What is that number for the family?
It's still 2,000. That $2,000 is attached to that Medicaid. That's a Medicaid rule. So a lot of times people think with SSI, it's the SSI that's being halted. That $2,000 limit is in relation to CMS Medicaid rule. So it's just because SSI, when you're here in Texas and you're on SSI, the insurance that goes with SSI is Medicaid, but that $2,000 resource limit is connected to that Medicaid rule. And so as we move forward, you'll see when someone is working on an SSI, Social Security has an entire provision to help protect that Medicaid. And I'll touch on that, as we go further down. But that 2,000 resource limit, and that's why you heard me say deal breaker. It's a deal breaker for that Medicaid, and that's why Social Security will send that stop sign or red flag and say, "Hey, this person's over resources over that $2,000 resource limit. Halt that Medicaid." So that $2,000 limit is connected to that Medicaid. Now, the $3,000 resource limit is for a couple who are both receiving SSI, not family. So it's still based on an individual, whichever individual is receiving SSI, that it's a $2,000 resource limit, and that's the resource limit is connected to that Medicaid. That's that Medicaid rule.
Okay, so someone wants to know, can we pay for clothing with SSI money? And mainly it's for food and shelter, but what other items can a person pay for? Again, we want you to read the
That
guide
guide.
for representative payees, but do you have any insight on that?
Yes, I mean, typically what SSA is saying is, especially you as parent, you or you as rep payee, you're making the best judgment on what to purchase. But ideally, SSI is for food and shelter, right? But you as rep payee or parent are making the best judgment on what's needed to take care of, the person you're helping, right? The person, whether that be your child or if you're a rep payee. So yes, you could buy clothes, right? I mean, we do. Clothes are a necessity, as well as food and shelter. But you, as rep payee parent, you are the one that's making the best judgment on what to purchase for your child's needs.
We have someone who put, we are grandparents and guardians. Our children just turned 18, but I don't recall them ever asking our monthly income. Is that because we are grandparent guardians? And there is a lot of convoluted things in that little statement right there.
Yeah.
'Cause they could be getting, like, if the parents, the child's biological parent is either deceased or drawing Social Security disability benefits, they might be getting benefits under said parent. If there is some kind of adoption in place, they might be getting parent benefits under the grandparents record. And then we're not talking about Title 16, we're talking about Title 2. So it starts getting confusing. And what I would say is reach out and we can help you peel the layers of the onion back on that one. But that one is complicated.
Yes.
Okay. Please clarify, and I'm not sure I totally understand this, iPads for SSI recipients for telemed, online banking appointments, etc.
I'm not sure what that.
I'm not sure. I don't know if we're saying, can we pay for iPads for SSI recipients for telemed appointments? I think is what we're asking is, can we use SSI money for something like an iPad?
Um, I would think so if it's a need, right? If it's a need for some reason, you might be able to. And for example, if one is working and you're needing to purchase an iPad for whatever reason, and they're on SSI, that iPad might count as a work incentive, for example. But I would kind of maybe need to know more about what you're trying to do iPad wise, to really kind of clarify and answer that question safely.
Okay.
And I
Um,
see there's a few more questions
Yeah,
in
let me
here.
go through a couple of them and then we'll keep
Yeah,
moving. My son is going to turn 18 this July. Is it better to apply after he turns 18? That is my advice, because otherwise it's going to be based off of your income and assets, not his. So you have to have more than $2,000 in your name, including a 401k, including everything. If you have more than one car, you can have one house worth any amount. You could have one car, and there's some
sure.
exceptions to the having a second car if there's a loan on it or if it's super old. There's some clear as mud exceptions, and you can view those on the Social Security website. But in general, yes, after their 18th birthday. Here's another one that says, I may be getting ahead of the presentation. My adult son is receiving 140.63 in SSI due to my SSA benefit and VA benefit for him. If he is employed and earns above the SSI, how does he retain his eligibility for SSI and Medicaid? That's going to be
Mr.
the
Rick, Mr. Rick, I want you to hold that question because that it sounds like your son is possibly a concurrent beneficiary. Possibly a concurrent beneficiary. Um, there's each rules. If he is in fact a concurrent beneficiary, that means he's following SSI rules and Title II rules at the same time, and that can be very confusing. What I can recommend, if you are like it's happening now, please reach out to me. Please even reach out to VR. You can actually come to VR for benefits counseling, and I highly, highly recommend benefits counseling if in fact your son is concurrent and y'all are in the thick of trying to figure out what to do. Because it
free
is.
benefit counseling. There is free benefit counseling for everyone who is getting benefits. So if you want to know how work is going to impact said benefits, whether it's Title 16 or Title 2,
Mhm.
then you can go through that free benefit counseling. And then the other thing, again, another boring read, but there is something called the Social Security Red Book, and it is a book that explains the different programs and how work impacts the different programs. And working definitely impacts the two different programs very differently. So you want to familiarize yourself with the Social Security Red Book. Again, it's another PDF, and you can download that right from the Social Security website.
Yes. And for the parents that are asking, do I apply when my, child turns 18? That is a question. And I always tell parents who are kind of on the fence, because oftentimes, especially if they're transitioning from school into their adulthood, um, oftentimes parents are left with, is this the only option for my adult child? And so you may not think that's the right road to go down. And if you're having trouble, making an informed decision, if in fact that's the next option for your child, like, do we do SSI? Do we not do SSI? More than happy to answer any questions regarding that as well, because I know that's a question that comes up too. And with the Red Book reference, the Red Book is great, but I will tell you to be cautionary because it can send you down rabbit holes of having more questions. So if you find yourself reading through the Red Book and you're finding yourself having more questions than answers, it's probably because you've entered a rabbit hole, and sometimes that Social Security language can trip you up. So don't feel overwhelmed or that you're, reading something wrong, because the Red Book itself, it can get a little, confusing and in depth. So if you have any questions and kind of need, some more clarity about what you've seen in the Red Book, please feel free to reach out. Next slide, I think it will get us into just touching on the work incentives. And the work incentives are important in the sense that they exist. SSI work incentives exist. So if you've got a child who's working and they're on SSI, please remember and know that work incentives exist to help boost the SSI cash benefits back up. But with work incentives, the key thing to remember in that, work. One has to be employed to utilize work incentives, and there's different ones with different eligibility criteria on when they can be used. Next slide is the SSI calculation, the formula that's used. This is how Social Security calculates the SSI each month. Okay, so this is the layout of that. If you see the first section, that's how unearned income is factored in, and unearned income means anything that wasn't worked for. That is where unearned income would go. And off the bat, if there is any unearned income, you subtract that general income exclusion, and then that gives you your total countable earned income. And you can see we've color-coded the boxes to kind of help keep up with the math and the formula on how it goes. That second section is how work earnings are factored in. And you'll see in between there's different things, and those are the work incentives. That first one that you saw, that student earned income exclusion, impairment-related work expense, blind work expense. The third section puts the both earned and unearned incomes together, as well as another work incentive, which is the PASS, which is essentially like an eternal savings plan, if you will, with Social Security for those who are on SSI. But passes are very complex to keep up with, and they're not just meant for everybody. And that last section is kind of putting it all together, and it tells you how much you can expect to receive in SSI for that given month after you've gone through this calculation sheet, the process.
And I generally like to simplify it for basically every $2 earned, they're going to count $1. They're not counting the first $85 if the person is working. So that $20 exclusion, the $65 exclusion, $85. So the gross earnings per month minus that $85 divided by 2 is the simple, and that is very simple, and not any of the other things as far as the PASS program or some of these other programs that she had mentioned is. And so then they're going to take that amount and they're going to subtract that from the 967 or whatever amount that the individual's getting, if they're getting 644.67, because there's no rental agreement. So Nehtra, we're basically out of time.
Just go to slide 25, just so everyone can see that for those who are working and on SSI, okay, a lot of times you're going to get I can only earn or work a certain number of hours or earn a certain salary. I want you guys to remember on slide 25, there's the 1619B threshold. This is a number that does change annually, and typically it's going to come around maybe March when it changes. But so just for this year and last year, what one who is working and can earn and be an SSI recipient is $50,161 and keep free Medicaid and their SSI status. They may not be getting a cash benefit, but they are still considered an active SSI recipient, and they'll still have their free Medicaid that's attached. So that threshold amount for right now is $50,161, and that is the 1619B threshold, Medicaid 1619B.
And I also just wanted to mention here with these thresholds, we've got people asking, my kid is 7, should I apply now? And that's going to depend on if you have more than $2,000 in your name. It's going to depend on what your household income is. So I can't broadly say that nobody on here should apply prior to their child turning 18. I can broadly say that most of the families that we work with, it is pointless for them to apply prior to their child turning 18. It's usually after age 18 that the child will qualify. So I know we've talked about a lot. We've had a lot of great questions, and we are out of time for today. We're going to have Nehtra back, and we're going to talk further about this. We've got the student earned income exclusion here. I do think it's important that people know that this exists, that their SSI will not be reduced for working if they have a student earned income exclusion, if they're between the ages of 18 and 22 and are full-time students. So you got to ask for this. It's not automatically applied, but this is a beautiful program, and I do love this. My daughter benefited from it greatly while she was going to college. So from a perspective, I'm going to kind of run through. You guys are going to get a copy of all of these slides, and we'll kind of come back and get to the rest of these slides when we have our next review. I think we should probably pick up where we left off, Nehtra, and kind of have a part 2, and we'll get with Meredith and get that scheduled. You had mentioned that Texas, the Workforce Commission, they do this benefit counseling, workforce solutions. Does a person have to be signed up for VR or Workforce Solutions in order to get the free benefit counseling through your organization?
Because benefits counseling is now a substantial service for all VR agencies across the nation, folks can literally come to VR just for benefits counseling alone if they wanted to.
Okay, perfect. Some people ask about our services. We always offer free personalized consultations. So I know everybody has a different unique situation that was on here today, but if you want to go deeper, if your situation is a little convoluted, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help. We always offer free personalized consultations. Everybody's going to get a copy of the entire slide deck today. which will have any links in there that she referred to in her slides. It'll have Netra's contact information, our contact information. This QR code that is on the screen will take you to our calendar to schedule your consultation with us. So you're going to get a link to the recording and a copy of today's slides, and this presentation will be on our YouTube channel later this afternoon as well. So thanks everybody for being here. There's a lot of questions. We probably didn't get to all of them. The thing is when we start talking about SSI and Medicaid, it's the 10,000-pound gorilla. It's a lot. I think the more we talk about it, the more questions that come up. And these are all good questions, and we are here to help and happy to help you with this. So thank you again for being here with us, and we're going to get a part 2 so we can pick up where we left off, and then we'll actually even have a part 3. So we'll take a deeper dive into that childhood disability benefits and Title II benefits as opposed to Title 16. So thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate it, and we certainly hope that you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.